Hi, so let's have a look at one of the best feet you can buy, the walking foot, or also known as the even feed foot. So we're going to have a little look at this, and also the quilting bar that goes with it that will just slot, and I'll show you this here because it's harder to see when I'm on the machine. It just clicks into the back there, and then you'll be able to move that in and out so that you can judge your measurements. Right, let's go over to the machine. So the first thing we're going to do to actually put this foot on is we have to unscrew the whole of this section here. This is known as the ankle, and it sits on the shank and it holds your usual feet on here. So when you're changing your feet, normally you leave this part on, but to put the walking foot on, we have to take the whole of this off. So I'm going to unscrew that. Make sure you put it somewhere safe. If you lose that, you're up the swanny, because you can't then put your different feet on. While I've got this off though, I want to show you, can you see there's a little gap here? If you don't have a walking foot but you have a walking bar, you can use it by pushing it through that gap at the back there, and you can use this as a hem guide. So for example, if you wanted to do maybe one of your fancy stitches and you wanted to make sure you had the right distance around the bottom of the hem, but rather than using the guides here on your machine, you can actually follow this around the bottom of the garment, but look, you could do it about 2 inches up the hem on a garment, which would look really nice. Okay, so the most important thing is this bar here needs to sit above here, which is your needle bar, where your needle attaches. So what I'm going to do first, because I only have 2 hands, as most people do, is I'm going to screw that little screw back in, just a couple of turns, just so that it holds, because on the foot we've got this little hook here, and that is going to hang over here. So the most important thing is making sure this is going to sit above here. So as I go in, I can hook it above that screw, make sure the bar is above the needle bar, and then I'm going to do it finger tight first off, and then go in with a screwdriver. When you're using this foot, you will notice it will be a lot clunkier than your usual feet. So don't think that your machine is broken or anything. These feet have got a lot more going on, because it's got the teeth underneath here as well, which match with the feed dogs that are under here in your machine. It just makes a lot more, it's a bit more rattly, let's just put it that way, and you will notice that when you start sewing, but that is absolutely usual. Okay, so the next thing to talk about is marking up. So when you're marking up your fabric, there are lots of different ways that you can use, because for a lot of the time I use this foot if I'm doing things like quilting on bags or quilts or things like that, or even on clothing. You can use a friction pen, which disappears when you iron it off. One word of warning, I've used it here, but I wouldn't normally use it on this colour fabric. I don't use friction pens on anything other than really light white or cream or something like that, because it does leave a bit of a sort of ghost mark. It irons off, but it leaves almost like a white mark if you use it on darker fabrics. So I found that out quite early on, so just be careful when you're using this. Always test any of these methods on your fabric first, because the other thing to be wary of is tailor's chalk. White tailor's chalk, absolutely fine, but you often get in a set coloured ones. The blue one, I know people that have used that and it's not come out afterwards, so just be careful. If you're on the inside of a garment, it doesn't matter, but when you're marking the front, it's really going to show up. You can also use soap, just to show you that that does actually mark really, really well. And obviously that's just hand soap, probably from like a hotel room or something, but that's quite a good method because that will wash out afterwards quite happily. You can also use masking tape. So this here is 1/4 inch masking tape, but regular masking tape will do, and on something like this, that is probably what I would use because it's so easy to see and to use. The nice thing about having the quilting bar is that you only need to mark one line. If you were doing crosshatch quilting like diamonds or something onto a bag, then you only need to mark out your first line, and every time, once you've sewn that, you'll see here, it leaves you stitch that line, you end up with a ditch, or a gutter, as one of my ladies famously called it once. So what you then do is when your bar is in the back, you can just bring the foot down to sit in that ditch, and that just means that every single one will be evenly marked. So if I stitch this one, for example, and what I'm going to do, because on this piece here, you'll notice the difference in stitches here. This is your regular stitch setting, 2.4 on this machine. This one here, 3.5. Usually if I'm doing quilting or something like that, I will take my stitch length up. It just looks a little bit neater. The stitch length will depend on how it's moving through the machine. So if it feels like it's not moving fast enough or it's struggling, always look at your stitch length. Bear in mind, if you're going through thicker fabrics, you need more thread to actually go down. So if you're getting a lot of skipped stitches, for example, it might be because the stitch isn't long enough and it's not able to get down and pick up the bobbin thread to bring it up to the top. Okay, so I'm going to take my stitch length up on here to about 3.5. Ooh, that's in the way of my presser foot. There we go. And line it up, and then I can just sew, and you can hear the sort of clicking noise, and that's just those top feet just gently walking it through, and that's what it's doing. So on thicker fabrics, fleeces, velvets, even slippery fabrics, anything that divides if you've got two layers together and as you put it in it starts to part company, this is where you would put this foot on. So it's not just for quilting. I use it quite a lot in dressmaking. Jerseys, for example, some jerseys that tend to pull apart as you're stitching through, they almost fight against each other, and those teeth on the top are really going to help with that. Okay, so once you've done one row, then you can decide with your quilting bar how close you want to be. So let's say I want to be much closer. I can then push that in, put it down, so it's now going to run down there, and I'm not going to watch my needle here. I'm going to actually watch the quilting bar going along. So I'm watching this as it runs along and in the ditch. Just a note on finishing, if you've got a lock off stitch on your machine, this is a really good time to use it. It will do 3 or 4 little stitches and then stop, and that means you can then cut it off completely, and then you can even trim up the underneath, but it's knotted it, so it's all finished. If not, leave long ends so that you can then tuck them in. If you're quilting, you just thread them. I'll do a little video on that actually, because there's a needle that you can get that really makes life easy for that. Okay, so there you go, look, perfect distance, and every single one that you do will be the same distance. So for example, I could start again and run another line along there. And the more you quilt something, the thicker, the stiffer you're actually going to make it. So that's why we use it, particularly in bag making. If you're on, say, a cotton poplin or something like that, the more you quilt it, you'll end up with quite a stiff fabric at the end of it. Okay, so I think that's just about everything at the moment. If you've got any questions though, do email me and I'll try to fit it into either one of the live feeds or another video going forward. We will come back to the walking foot because at some point I will talk about when you're quilting, not just doing straight lines, but when you want to actually do designs and things within quilting. So we'll definitely come back to that. But as I say, a quilting foot, walking foot, even feed foot, whatever you want to call it, it's not just for quilting. It is for all kinds of dressmaking as well. And I would certainly advise anyone that this is a foot to get. Okay.